Welcome back to Griffonomics, where we conduct financial investigations to define the risk before we look at the reward. Today, we're diving into the era of drone dominance. The source material you shared with us, it paints a really clear picture. The U.S. is executing a total whole-of-government pivot to achieve aerial superiority.
It really is. And it's built on these two massive prongs.
Right, first is a regulatory firewall. It's designed to just shut out foreign technology.
And second, a massive, and I mean massive, $1 billion military surge.
Aimed at fielding, 300,000 attack drones by 2028?
That's the target. But that's just a high-level summary. The real insight here is that the Pentagon is betting that speed and sheer volume can beat traditional quality and cost.
So it's a numbers game.
It's entirely a numbers game. This whole strategy, it rests on the total democratization of drone lethality. The goal is to turn virtually every single soldier into a certified pilot to counter that mass-produced cheap threat coming from adversaries. It's an acceleration mandate.
Okay, so let's unpack that first prong you mentioned, the regulatory firewall. This seems like it was a genuine shockwave to the industry.
It was.
The focus isn't just about sanctioning a single big Chinese company anymore. The sources say the focus has shifted to banning the origin itself.
That's exactly right. The crucial move was the FCC's going forward ban. It landed on December 22, 2025, and it's incredibly sweeping.
What does it actually do?
This regulation adds all new foreign-made unmanned aircraft systems, and critically, their components, to the covered list.
Components, too, so like the motors, the chips.
Everything, communication chips, batteries, you name it. And what that means is those products just can't get the authorization they need to be imported or sold here.
But hold on, the immediate concern for, police or farmers must have been their existing fleets getting grounded. You can't just tell a farmer to stop surveying his crops overnight.
Absolutely. The government had to build a balancing act into the policy.
The grandfather clause.
The grandfather clause. Exactly. All previously authorized models, all existing inventory, it all remains legal to use. That protects those essential services.
But here's the rub, right? Even with that clause, something like 80% of U.S. law enforcement agencies are heavily reliant on certain foreign platforms.
They are. And now they face what some sources are literally calling a business-ending crisis. Their upgrade paths are just gone.
And I imagine the problem goes deeper than just the brand name on the box. Foreign hardware is already trying to get around these rules.
Oh, it's a classic shell game. The sources cite a perfect example. The SkyRover X1.
Okay.
It's marketed here as a generic, a compliant alternative. But if you dig into the equipment filings, the hardware, the actual motor, and the communication chip links directly back to manufacturing hubs in Shenzhen, China.
So the guts of the machine are what triggered the ban, not the marketing website.
Precisely. The new rules are trying to force transparency by focusing on where the drone is designed, controlled, or manufactured. They're trying to close that shell company loophole by looking at the DNA of the device, not just the label.
But wait a minute. We outsourced most of this manufacturing years ago. So if the ban is effective and that grandfathered inventory eventually runs out, this transition is going to cause huge friction.
That is the core conflict.
Are we not just shooting ourselves in the foot if U.S. manufacturing isn't ready?
Well, for sectors like law enforcement or utilities, the current domestic alternatives are often way more expensive and, crucially, less capable than the foreign tech they're supposed to replace.
So you're paying more for less.
You're paying more for less.
Yeah.
We're talking about severe growing pains.
Yeah.
These agencies are trapped between national security requirements on one side and operational necessity, the need for affordable, reliable tools right now on the other. The transition window is very, very tight.
And speaking of tight transition windows, that friction leads us right to the second really aggressive prong of the strategy, the massive military acceleration. This is being driven by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
And this is where the money is really pouring in.
It seems like a radical break from the traditional, multi-decade acquisition cycle.
It is. The Pentagon has launched a $1 billion initiative with one singular, almost dizzying goal: rapidly deploy over 300,000 small one-way attack drones by 2028.
So this is the ultimate cost exchange.
Exactly. Instead of spending millions on a single sophisticated missile, they're spending as little as $5,000 to field a lethal system. Volume is the new metric for success.
That volume, 300,000 units, is just staggering. How does the military even plan to acquire them that fast? I see they're using a competitive process they call gauntlets.
Yeah, you can think of the gauntlets less like a traditional military contract and more like a rapid-fire startup accelerator.
Okay.
The initial phase is designed to get 30,000 drones produced by 12 different companies by July 2026.
So really fast.
Incredibly fast. They want tens of thousands of drones in the force in 2026 and then hit hundreds of thousands by 2027. This demands a speed the bureaucracy just wasn't built for.
And that's why Hegseth is forcing this total cultural reset. He knows that in this context, bureaucracy is the enemy of speed.
He's pushing for what he explicitly calls a Department of War culture. He's telling senior officers to just cut the bureaucratic red tape. The pressure is intense.
And it's not a suggestion.
No, it's a hard deadline. The timeline dictates that every single military service, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, must establish active-duty drone formations by September 2026.
So if the Pentagon is building 300,000 systems, they're going to need 300,000 operators. That takes us to what seems like the most radical shift and the core thesis of this deep dive, making drone operation a universal infantry skill.
This is where that democratization of lethality becomes real. The policy you mentioned, MARADMIN 62425, opens the training to any MOS.
Any military occupational specialty.
Any of them. We're talking about a Marine who might normally be a cook or a mechanic or a supply clerk.
And now they're being trained as an attack drone operator, an ADO.
Right. They're standardizing this across the entire force, viewing it as a basic competency, not some niche skill.
The sources point to this push for decentralization, this goal to let NCOs loose.
Yes, allowing non-commissioned officers to just train near their barracks without needing complex range clearances or specialized aviation units.
The philosophy seems to be that the NCO, the sergeant, is the military's asymmetric strength.
Exactly. By simplifying permissions, they're treating drone practice like rifle practice. Imagine a Marine cook, after maybe just 26 hours of simulator training, has the tactical capability to destroy a target. It completely redefines the threat profile of even support staff.
But these cheap, mass-produced drones, they have to be armed. They must require some pretty specialized ground-level support for that.
Oh, absolutely. They've had to invent new jobs just to handle the explosive.
Like what?
They created the new 5-day payload specialist course, the PS course.
And its only focus is?
Its singular focus is safe explosive handling and preparation of prefabricated warheads used to arm lethal drones. You need people whose entire job is safely strapping high explosives onto commercial off-the-shelf hardware.
And Special Operations Command, SOCOM, is taking that a step further with what they call maker operators.
This is maybe the most forward-looking piece of the whole training puzzle.
So they don't just fly, they build and repair.
Right. SOCOM's intensive 10-day course requires special warfare operators to move beyond just piloting. They have to master assembly, soldering, wiring, software configuration for FPV first-person view drones.
And the key point is minimal simulation time is allowed.
Minimal. They're training them to be forward-deployed repair and manufacturing experts who can cannibalize parts and keep these systems flying with almost no resources in the field.
Okay, so we've covered the regulatory shield, the production surge, and the training pipeline, but we have to talk about the physical constraints that challenge all of it.
The environment.
The environment itself is the adversary.
If the new threat is a fleet of cheap, mass-produced drones, then the environment immediately starts dictating which ones fail first. And the Arctic, in particular, is what the sources call the ultimate adversary.
Why there specifically?
Standard tech fails catastrophically in the high north. We have anecdotes in the sources of plastic wires cracking, becoming brittle at -40 degrees. Hydraulic fluids congeal. Batteries just die. Even expensive night vision optics are breaking.
So even if you make 300,000 drones, if they can't survive the cold, the whole model just collapses.
Exactly. And it's not just the weather. You have severe navigation risks up there.
Right. The Aurora Borealis interferes with GPS.
It does, but then you layer the human element on top of that.
Yeah.
Russian GPS jamming is so pervasive in northern Norway that regulators have officially stopped counting the incidents.
They stopped counting.
Stopped counting. This forces pilots, military and civilian, to rely on manual navigation without satellite data. It renders a lot of these cheap digital drones completely unusable.
So the Arctic requires high-end specialized gear. What about the other extreme, the close-in fight in a dense urban environment?
The urban challenge relies on what the sources call the Troika of Tech: drones, robots, and sensors. They're used specifically for countering explosive threats.
And the breakthrough there is using advanced sensing systems.
Right, things like thermal imaging and LiDAR, carried by drones, to detect the thermal inertia of buried threats.
Thermal inertia. For you listening, what does that mean in simple terms?
It's basically sensing the echo of heat. When a mine or an IED is buried, it holds onto heat or loses it differently than the soil around it.
Okay.
So by using these sensitive thermal systems, a drone can spot those subtle temperature differences and map an entire minefield from the air. It is infinitely safer than sending human combat engineers in blind.
And once that data is mapped, the breaching relies on automation.
Correct. The mapped data lets robotic platforms take over, specifically the golf cart-size SMET, the small multipurpose equipment transport.
And the SMET just clears the path.
It clears the path by carrying and launching mine-clearing explosives. It gets the humans out of the most dangerous part of the job.
So if we pull all this together, what does this entire U.S. drone dominance strategy look like? We've got the regulations, the money, the training, these huge friction points. What's the final verdict here?
Well, if we connect it all to the bigger picture, you're watching the U.S. trying to renovate a ship while sailing it directly through a storm.
I like that analogy.
It's aggressive, it's necessary, and it really captures the three moving parts.
Okay, so the FCC is patching the hull. That's the regulatory containment to stop the leaks from foreign supply chains.
Right. And the Pentagon is replacing the engine, that's the domestic industrial base, to get more speed and power with mass-produced systems.
And finally, the Marines are training every single sailor, from the cook to the mechanic. That's the universal training, teaching them to repair and fight with the ship's new systems.
But the fundamental, unavoidable risk point in all this is the very thing the SEC is using to patch that hull.
The supply chain.
The supply chain. Domestic manufacturers are already sounding the alarm. They're warning that the FCC's blanket ban on all foreign components, even from allied nations, could inadvertently cripple the very American companies it's supposed to reward.
Because our U.S. companies still rely on parts from, say, Europe or Japan.
Heavily. So this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to consider. Will this billion-dollar gamble actually achieve drone dominance? Will it give the U.S. the volume and speed it needs?
Or will that transition window close before the domestic industrial base is ready, forcing the U.S. military to face a mass-produced threat with a newly trained force, but not enough weapons to fight with?